In 2003, HBO presented a documentary entitled Unchained Memories about the stories of former slaves interviewed during the 1930s, a part of the Federal Writers Project. The Federal Writers Project was a project that was put on by the US government in order to find out what former slaves were doing, and this also created the only opportunity where slaves could talk about their everyday lives on the plantation. And they also wanted to use this project to see, to deal with the unemployment rate among former slaves. And HBO adopted this film interpretation, and from there they compiled all of these narratives, and they had famous Black actors and actresses get together and reenact these narratives. The slave narratives may be the most accurate in terms of the everyday activities of the enslaved, serving as personal memoirs of more than 2,000 former slaves. Many of the slaves in the documentaries didn't even know how old they were. The documentary depicts the emotions of the slaves and what they endured, and the federal government created these narratives in an effort to reduce the unemployment of the 30s. And from these interviews, we've learned about the living standards, the long days, the everyday chores, and the tales of the good and bad slave owners. And so as I read the print versions of these narratives and later watched the documentary, I began to see where the stories of these men and women are told through the Negro spirituals. I saw the direct relationship of some of my favorite spirituals and the narratives of remarkable slave women, whose names, if not for these narratives, we would not know. Slave women like Sarah Grudger, born in 1816 and died at 121 years of age. In 1937, through the Federal Writers Project, she was able to tell her story. Or some of the women interviewed with Ms. Grudger, who had no idea when they were born. They could only guess their ages based on life events. It is their courage and their strength and their resiliency that has set this example for us all. And so I was inspired to take these narratives and combine them with concert arranged spirituals to tell the story of one former slave woman through song. The year was 1806. On a plantation in Tennessee, Maddie Davis was born. The youngest of 11 children, she was born a slave. She didn't know who her father was because he had been sold to another plantation in Louisiana when she was just a baby. She only knew 2 of her siblings, as 4 of them were sold to other plantations. 3 died, and her 2 older brothers escaped for freedom, never to be heard from again. She belonged to Master Davis's plantation, and at 16 years old, she gave birth to his son, this being her second child with her master. Within minutes of her son's birth, he was sold away. She never even got to hold him. She also had a 5-year-old daughter who at a young age had become accustomed to seeing loved ones go. She knew that one day soon it would be her turn to go.
Is he
The integrity of the Black slave family. The integrity of the Black family was repeatedly and intentionally undermined. Masters and overseers would rape the women right in front of their husbands, and if he tried to do anything about it, they would kill him, or even worse, beat him. You see, slaves didn't mind death because they saw death as freedom. She once saw a slave beaten so badly, they crisscrossed the lashes on his back and literally poured salt in his wounds. She knew she never wanted to experience anything like that, but there was a rebel inside of her that was willing to do whatever it took to taste freedom. A warrior she was. She would get caught daydreaming about freedom, thinking about ways to escape. She would rather death than be a slave. She was tired of the abuse. She was tired of the rape. And she was tired of bondage. And that night, she declared that she would make her way to freedom. Escape from slavery was extremely difficult and dangerous. The penalty could be mutilation or death. She had heard of the Underground Railroad. It was a network of safe houses of white people who didn't believe in slavery. And as they followed the North Star, the Underground Railroad would lead them to freedom. All she needed to do was get across the Mason-Dixon line, and in the United States, it's the Ohio River. She wanted to let the others know, but she also knew that if the overseers caught them talking, she would get whipped. They weren't allowed to talk, nor were they allowed to be silent. All they could do was sing, and she knew just the songs to sing to let the others know that tonight they would steal away and they would wait in the water so that the hounds wouldn't pick up their scents.
Still
actually a code song born out of slavery in America. So literally the slaves would wade in the water because the hounds couldn't smell them because of the water. And so they knew that when each other sang that song, that tonight they were planning an escape. Maddie and the other slaves sang to everything they did. They sang to express themselves about the troubles in this world and the joys in the next one. One of her most favorite times to sing was when it was time to worship God. The slaves weren't allowed to have their own separate church. So Maddie and the others would sit up in the balcony at their master's church and mostly listen to sermons about what it meant to be a good slave. But she knew that God was bigger than that. So they would sneak into each other's cabins at night and have their own church. She loved to hear the stories about Jesus and Joshua and Moses and Noah. One of the stories that she loved to hear most was the one about Joshua and how he fought the battle at Jericho. In 1863, President Abraham Lincoln issued the Emancipation Proclamation. By 1865, more than 4 million enslaved Black people were made free. Maddie remembers a Yankee soldier came to Master Davis's plantation and announced, "This 4th day of June, 1865, remember this day. Today you is free just like me. You got all the right in life just like a white person got. You can be free to marry who you want. You can live and work for yourselves. You got all the right." This was the day Maddie had prayed for her entire life, and it finally happened. Although they had been emancipated, a feeling of sadness came over Maddie as she thought about all the tribulation, the turmoil, and the death she'd seen her people go through. Although she was excited about being free, she didn't really know what that meant because she had been enslaved her entire life. Where would she go? What would she do? But she knew that wherever she went and whatever she did, Jesus would be there to walk with her. Even though the slaves, the enslaved, I should say, had been emancipated, the struggle to escape the oppressions of slavery was just beginning and still continues to this day. They were now free to legally marry, unite with family members, live and work for themselves. And she knew just how God had promised the Israelites He wanted them to let His people go. And it was on June 4th, 1865, at 59 years of age, Maddie finally got her chance to live. We know of famous slave women like Sojourner Truth and Harriet Tubman, for they've made their marks in history. But there are hundreds of thousands of slave women who are remarkable, but their stories have gone untold. The unmarked graves of those women model the resiliency and strength for all of us. It is on their shoulders that I stand, and the reason why I've chosen to honor them in this way. Thank you all so much. Are there any questions about anything you heard today? Do we have any people that are going to sing for us today? Yes? Who would like to go first?